Hello, and welcome back to my analysis of Frieren. We're back this week with episode 6, and this episode actually made me tear up quite a bit. If you've been following my videos for a while but aren't subscribed, I'd really appreciate it if you do. Please hit the like button, and maybe leave a comment too for the algorithm. Just a quick plug as well for my streams. I've been a little inconsistent, but I'm still trying to finish Elden Ring. If you're interested in seeing my blind reactions to Frieren, they're available on Ko-Fi. I'm going to be starting reactions to other series too, so please look forward to them. So the recap we get for this episode is a lot shorter, but just as a refresher, we see Fern struggle dealing with the Einsam, but fortunately Frieren's there to help and they clear the threat and move on with their journey. Frieren then gaslights Fern into attacking a dragon, which scares Fern quite a lot. I'm kind of interested to see if this fear comes back to bite them later. I don't know if they meet another dragon in the future, but it might be okay now that they have a proper front line in Stark. When discussing why the dragon fled, I threw out the idea that Stark might be dragonborn.
Hey, you! You're finally awake.
And I guess this episode confirms that that's not the case. Stark is an actual human, but he sure is strong enough to make me question his humanity. Despite having left his master though, we see that Stark has diligently continued his training, and despite his, I guess, breakdown in front of Frieren and Fern in the last episode, he actually looks pretty cool and quite reliable actually in this shot. Having seen the entire episode, I know the actual reason the dragon hasn't attacked since, but since Stark himself isn't actually aware of it, I still kind of count it as him tricking the people in the village. I suspected it in the last episode, but this episode explicitly confirms that he isn't tricking them out of malice or because he wants the celebrity treatment. He's doing it so that they can have peace of mind. As we saw in the last episode, he's basically able to trick himself and them for everyone's benefit. In the last episode, Frieren says that he seems to be a pretty good guy, and I agree. This episode proves it. He feels the responsibility to live up to the expectations the villagers have for him, even though he's scared and unsure of himself. He says this, and I think to some degree he is considering the possibility that he will run away. Like in the last episode where I mentioned there are just some situations where you can speculate about what you'd do or what you'd hope that you'd do, but you can't really be sure until you're in the situation. I feel like this is another one of those. For the past 3 years, he hasn't actually had to confront the dragon, and the last time he only was able to kind of stand his ground because he was frozen in place. From his perspective, he can't be sure what he'd do if he had to confront the dragon again. So when Stark told Frieren and Fern about this scar of his before, he tried to bluff saying that the scar came from an umbral dragon, but honestly I think Aizen is probably scarier than an umbral dragon. Of course I don't actually know the hierarchy of monsters, so I can't say that for sure, but regardless it's interesting because the episode later reveals the truth about why Aizen actually hit him. I don't think Frieren kind of ever actually told Stark that truth though, so he might never know. I guess I'm hoping that maybe one day, assuming Aizen kind of lives long enough, the two will have the chance to reunite and they'll be able to talk it out properly. So when Stark said that it was a dumb reason, when Frieren basically told him that her motivation for doing things stemmed from praise from a certain idiot, Himmel, I thought that he actually understood where she was coming from, and he was just trying to play it off by calling it a dumb reason. It actually turns out that he hadn't ever received praise from Aizen, and he actually wanted that praise, probably, but because he never got it, when he heard Frieren's reason, he basically took it out on her instead. Alright, so I guess the ship is confirmed because they're already holding hands. So now that they've gotten the chance to talk for a bit, it seems that Fern's able to relate to the fear that Stark showed. I'm not sure if Fern is actively thinking about this or trying to manipulate him. I don't think she is. But as far as I can tell, Stark seems to be pretty sensitive to other people's expectations. So I think in expressing her expectation that he'll show up and be okay, that actually might play towards that.
魔物と初めて戦った時です。十分すぎるほど積んできました。ですが、恐怖で足がすくみ。
I really appreciate that they do give us this flashback. In the last episode, I mentioned that there seems to be more instances where the show will tease a memory but not give the full flashback. But I guess at least for some of those, they're just basically waiting for the right time. I also do wonder if Fern would have been able to deal with the Hyder illusion herself if she had enough time. And I think this suggests that eventually she would have been able to snap out of it and find the resolve to be able to blast him.
なぜか助けてくれないフリーレン様。
うちの師匠もそんな感じだわ。
I think the reason that both Frieren and Aizen chose not to interfere was because they trusted their students, and probably also felt that getting involved would actually only stunt their growth. It seems that things kind of worked out for Fern better than they worked out for Stark, but at least now, Fern is actually able to share what she learned with him.
覚悟を決めた時、体が動いたのです。
I think it's interesting to consider what would have happened if the dragon hadn't just fled. Would Stark have eventually steeled his resolve and kind of given it his all to take the dragon down? Or would he have fled and abandoned the villagers? In a sense, Frieren and Fern coming to the village puts pressure on him, but it also lightens the load because now the expectation isn't that he'll have to deal with the dragon alone, it's that he needs to occupy the dragon's attention until Frieren can take it down. So in that sense, it actually might be easier for him to face the dragon this time, and his answer now might not be indicative of his answer 3 years ago. I guess I just wanted to note that things have moved pretty quickly from Fern giving Stark this death glare to believing that he'll be able to step it up when it's time. So if it was colder, I bet Frieren would have already fallen asleep, or maybe she wouldn't have because she was actively waiting for Fern to come back, but I guess we'll never know. You know what they always say, heroes always arrive late. Unless you're Himmel, I guess, because at least as far as I can tell, he was very punctual, and Frieren would be the one that was late, if anyone. I didn't really expect that Stark would flip from being a coward to resolving himself to die if it means that Frieren can finish off the dragon. Even though it does seem that Frieren's gotten a little better at understanding a human's concept of time, it's clear that she still kind of struggles to grasp it fully. Assuming that Stark is around the same age as Fern, I guess 3 years is approximately a fifth of his life so far.
手が震えています。
怖いものは怖いんだよ。
As Fern kind of notes here, his hands are trembling and he's obviously afraid, but even then, when he said,
よし、じゃあ一丁やるか。
he tries to project confidence there, whether that's to trick himself into believing that he can do it, or to trick his party and put them at ease. I think it's very sweet that he's doing it.
アイゼン、手が震えてる。怖いの？
I understand that they haven't really shown Aizen as an effective communicator, but I do think it may have made a huge difference for Stark if he'd mentioned that he was scared in the past too. Until now, at least to Stark, Aizen must have seemed like the stoic veteran, the famous warrior of the hero's party, and maybe Stark thought that no matter how hard he tried, he wouldn't match up to his master's expectations, and his master wouldn't be able to understand his struggles. Getting hit by Aizen was what made Stark decide to leave, but I can't help but feel that his insecurities would have kind of built up over time. So yeah, I think this reveal is exactly what Stark needed to hear. It's also very inspiring, because a lot of people definitely shrink back in the face of their fear, and maybe even think that being afraid is a bad thing. Like, in this scene, Frieren even shows surprise that Aizen openly admits to his fear, but the important thing is how you respond to your fear, and maybe even make use of it. I also think it's an interesting parallel that in the flashback, Frieren points out that Aizen's trembling, and in the present, it's Fern. The show again does the overlapping transition, emphasizing their similarities.
そうか。師匠も
Earlier in the episode, Stark had said that he'd made up his mind to go with Frieren and Fern to fight the dragon, but I think learning about Aizen's fear was the last push he needed to face the dragon, and we can see that it's only now that he actually steps up toward the dragon in order to confront it. The encounter starts and we finally get the reveal of Stark's monstrous strength. I think the show built this up very well, and I even mentioned this possibility that the dragon saw the latent strength in Stark and decided that it didn't want to mess with him, but I guess I kind of got distracted with my Dragonborn Dovahkiin theory. It seems that the implication is that Stark left before Aizen had the chance to clear things up. Either way, the show has alluded to Aizen's life being near its end, but I hope that the two of them can have the chance to have this conversation and kind of reconcile, even though they're not really fighting. I guess Stark just ran away, but reconcile and clear up the misunderstandings before that happens. Earlier on, they did actually show that Stark noticed Aizen's arm shaking when he got hit during their fight. He must have assumed that Aizen was shaking in anger at the time, but perhaps this new information can recontextualize that moment for him. It's unclear whether or not he actually made that connection though. Something else to note is that the series is clearly saying that fear is a very important survival instinct, but the show has never really shown Frieren being afraid, I think. And she's obviously still alive. I know she's really powerful, but just how strong is she really? Or is it just that her long life and abundant experience have kind of numbed her to that fear? It might also be that she just doesn't express the fear in the way that other characters in the series has, because she has mentioned being scared of Fern when she's angry. So the dragon's talons, which Stark had been specifically scared of, and described as basically cutting through the buildings as though they were just vegetables, were instantly shattered by his swing. I really appreciate how the series built this moment up, and I've kind of cooled down from when I first watched the scene, but I really felt the hype in the moment. I'm excited to see what Stark manages to accomplish moving forward. I feel like the animation is going really hard in this scene. I guess I'm used to dragons and big monsters looking very clunky when they show up, but I think they did really well here. And of course, specifically at this moment in the fight, the dragon is preparing to use its breath, but Stark doesn't even actually flinch. I guess this is the callback to all that he needed was the resolve to face the dragon, and now that he has the resolve, he's ready to do what he needs to do. He slams the mouth shut and slams the dragon itself into the ground. So this is a bit of a funny scene where Stark doesn't even seem to realize that the dragon is already dead. But I think what's important to note is that it's clear that Stark underestimates his own strength, and Frieren doesn't really try to tell him that he's stronger than he thinks. The episode has made it clear that fear is important to survival, and so perhaps the worst thing that could happen is if things flip and Stark begins to overestimate himself. So, I guess I thought that the whole point of kind of the last episode and this one have been that Stark is a bit of a coward and that fear has served him well, but calling Frieren an old hag, Frieren's gonna teach him a whole new meaning of fear, I think.
OMAE は
もう死んでいるよ。
何?
よくやった。期待以上だ。
After initially watching this scene, I wondered if Frieren was banking on Stark being able to solo the dragon, but considering she says that he did better than she expected, I think she would have stepped in if she needed to.
偉いぞ。
So Stark finally got some praise. He probably would have wanted to hear it from Aizen rather than Frieren, but hopefully this still kind of gives him a bit of a boost.
宝の山だ。うひょー。全部は持っていけませんよ。
I've never heard Frieren so happy before. Just listen to her.
宝の山だ。うひょー。
I hadn't really given it much consideration until now, but it seems like they don't have dimensional storage or magic bags in this world. I think it's unfortunate that they can only take 3 items each, basically, as Fern says here, but it makes me curious what happens to the rest of the items. Did, like, the villagers take them and use them for funds, or, I don't know, does someone else steal them or something like that? I'm not sure the story will ever touch back on this, but I'm making note of this. At first it sounds like Stark's trying to be mean, but the added context made me tear up.
師匠はお前のせいで勇者一行の冒険がくだらないものになったって言ってたぜ。とても楽しい旅だったってよ。
すごい、本当にかき氷が出てきましたよ。
探索した甲斐があったでしょ。
It's sweet to think that the reason Frieren looks for more and more spells is because the ones she showed her party members in the past made them smile.
別にいいじゃないか。まだ旅は始まったばかりなんだ。
I think it's interesting to note how laid back Himmel was about the journey and their quest to defeat the Demon King. I mean, maybe that's why their party was the one that managed to succeed. So here we find out that there were other heroes and that they failed. I think it's kind of unclear whether or not Himmel is stronger than the hero of the south, but it is clear that his party is the one that took down the Demon King. I'm also kind of curious what the world designates as a hero. Obviously, the entire heroes party had achieved many feats, and I think all of them should be considered heroes in their own right, but from the way it's used, it kind of sounds like it's a class.
終わった後にくだらなかったって笑い飛ばせるような楽しい旅がしたいんだ。
So I teared up for this part, and not only during my initial watch, but again as I reviewed the episode writing my script. The added context makes the way that the party reflected on their journey in the first episode so much sweeter. It also explains why so many of the flashbacks Frieren has are silly. Of course, as I mentioned previously, there have been more serious ones as well recently, but it really does feel like the silly memories specifically became the entire party's treasure. I'm making note of this moment just in case they run into a grimoire that produces syrup in a future episode. But really, do you even need syrup? The scene itself is already sweet enough. This is like a really wholesome send-off, and I guess because Stark was actually really strong from the get-go, he just wasn't aware. His situation is a little different from fake it till you make it, but that's essentially what he did, I guess. The official English title of the episode seems to be The Hero of the Village, but as I mentioned before, the world seems to use the word hero in a very specific way, so I didn't want it to overlap.
透けて見える。見えますが、あまり面白い魔法ではありませんね。
So I can't really say I expected it to be brought up like this, but a couple of episodes ago, Frieren was clearly concerned about her proportions, and I guess Fern is kind of poking at those insecurities right now.
小さ。
小さかねえよ。
I really did not expect Fern to go there. The glare is not as intense as the death glare she gave him last episode, but Fern is really not holding back. Later on, Stark does give more context as to why he decides to join them on their journey. At this point, for my initial watch, I took his statement at face value, but kind of looking at things closer for my analysis,
俺もくだらない旅がしたくなったんだ。
his voice here is very soft, and he doesn't sound like especially excited or anything, so I think that's a subtle hint that there's more to his reasons than he's letting on. We're still in the 28th year, so time skips have definitely slowed down a lot. I guess the clear sign that time is moving and that we're in summer now is the lush green that we see on the trees in the forest surrounding the town.
少なくとも俺が着任してからは魔物も人も一匹たりとも通していない。
I think it's just the way that he's drawn, basically to be more imposing, but at first I thought that something suspicious was happening in this town. Maybe some sort of corruption to control the populace or like manipulate information flow, rather than like the problem actually being monster activity. As it turns out, I was just being too judgmental.
町を守る衛兵は核あるべきだ。
As Frieren says here, he's really just doing his job, and he's doing it well. I do think Frieren is kind of biased though, obviously, because Frieren is excited to take this opportunity to kick back and focus on magic research. So yeah, she's naturally inclined to perceive his actions in a positive light. The contrast here with Frieren's smile and Fern's flat expression also give a hint that Fern knows what's up and isn't having it. Right, Frieren, absolutely nothing that you can do. At first I thought that Stark's nonchalance here was because he didn't really mind either way, but as is revealed, he actually doesn't want to be squandering his time either. His nonchalance is likely because it's his first time experiencing Frieren 2 this song and dance, whereas Fern knows just how much time they stand to lose if they let Frieren have her way. At first I thought that their ship had actually sunk here, but as it turns out this wasn't rejection, but Fern basically going, "You're not one of them, are you?" And remember that fear is what will keep you alive, Stark. If they really are a ship, and right now I don't really have too much to go on, so it's really just an assumption, but if they are, I'm afraid he's already whipped.
関所が開くのは早くても2年は先だろうな。
So here, Fern clearly shows her determination to keep the time skips short. We are not jumping to the 30th year after Himmel the Hero's passing. So I wasn't sure after my initial watch because I was looking at some other stuff and not specifically at the parfaits, but it really is a lot smaller. I do think it is sweet though, pun intended, that Eisen helped Stark with a portion of the parfait back then. They haven't really explicitly said one way or the other, but considering Eisen said he specifically likes sour grapes, I'm pretty sure he doesn't really enjoy sweets. The gaslighting here is kind of funny, but it also reminds me of Nanami's quote from Jujutsu Kaisen. Finding more fallen out hairs on your pillow, watching your favorite stuffed bread disappear from the convenience store. The accumulation of those little despairs is what makes a person an adult.
しっかり親孝行してやれよ。
その最中だよ。
This scene serves as another hint for Stark's motivations in joining Frieren and Fern on their journey. He sees it as a way to make Eisen proud and pay him back for raising him.
シュタルク様、
わかったよ。半分あげるよ。
そうではなくて、この町で2年以上待つことになりそうだと言われたら。
嫌だけど。
そうですよね。嫌ですよね。
Fern has clearly spent too much of her time with Frieren, an elf with a skewed sense of time, and just a few episodes ago she was with Eisen too, who, is similar in that regard, but he does seem to be a bit more of an in-between of Frieren and humans. So obviously Stark was raised by Eisen, so maybe he experienced some things that are similar to what Fern's gone through, but it might not have had as severe of an impact on him because Eisen, like I said, is kind of in that middle ground.
限界コードまで強力な結界が張られていて、通過できないそうです。
I assume this barrier might become more relevant in a future episode. Maybe they'll visit it or have to do something involving it. Of course, they don't have to or anything, but I guess it feels important that they mentioned it, and I'm curious about how it works and who or what maybe maintains it as well. So I mean, you don't just look strong, Stark. You literally soloed a dragon, but it is true that he's pretty good at bluffing. I was suspicious last episode, mostly for meta reasons, but I think when Frieren and Fern met him for the first time, he definitely exuded confidence.
悪人顔ですしね。
うるせえ。
Fern definitely has a bit of a sharp tongue, but the smile she shows at the end was cute. I think she's happy she found someone that she can relate to and rely on. Of course she can rely on Frieren as her master for certain things, but without Stark, in this specific scenario, she would have been on her own. We see Stark getting some really good mileage out of the scar that Eisen, the Umbral Dragon, gave him. I thought the world would kind of just be at peace with the Demon King gone, but I guess without a leader, even though the monsters might be unorganized, it's not like they all disappeared.
シュタルク様がとても協力的だと思いまして。
あまり時間がないからな。
So somehow my brain jumped to Stark having some sort of terminal illness or a curse. I thought maybe that was like the trade-off for the inhuman strength that he showed off earlier against the dragon. But of course that's not it at all, and he just is very determined to give Eisen a proper send-off. We get to see what Stark was like when he was younger, and he's just so innocent and cute.
普段は自分のことを何も話さないくせに勇者一行の冒険を楽しそうに語ったんだ。
So to be fair to Eisen, he only started talking about this because Stark asked him. I guess I don't know what their other conversations were like, but it's very possible that he would have talked about more things if Stark had just shown interest. This probably applies to a lot of the stoic elderly people who've gone through a lot, but they clearly have stories to tell, but they're also not going to go out of their way to just start talking. So if you happen to have someone like that in your life, I think it's worth asking them. Of course, if they actually don't want to tell you and they say that, you should respect that boundary. But I don't think it really works if you kind of just wait for them to talk more. I really like how the shot focuses a lot on Eisen's hand that's firmly on Stark's shoulder. I think Stark is in a similar position to Fern, where they both think that their existence is basically, I guess, pale in comparison to the 10-year journey. But I think the show has done a good job at showing us that while these two may have, valid doubts, Frieren and Eisen truly do treasure them.
くだらなくて楽しい旅をたくさん経験して土産話をたっぷりと持って帰らないとダメなんだ。
So here Stark tells Fern his true motivations for joining them.
師匠はもう旅ができるような年じゃない。
I'm still kind of iffy on whether or not Eisen is truly too old to travel with them himself, but to the very least he's decided that he's done adventuring. We get to see Fern's expression as she realizes how similar their core motivations really are. So I mentioned this earlier, but I really do hope that Eisen does actually have a fair chunk of time left, and they do get a chance to meet up and kind of talk things out, and Stark has a chance to recount his own adventure to Eisen. So when I saw this, I immediately assumed that Frieren had done something horrendous. I thought maybe Mommy Fern didn't give her enough allowance, so she stole something. She's never really shown signs of actually doing anything illegal, but for some reason I can't put it past her either.
何やらかしたんだよ。
And it looks like I wasn't exactly alone in that assumption either.
申し訳ありませんでした、フリーレン様。
すごく嫌な流れな気がする。
Of course, the shoe quickly drops, and it turns out that this situation might actually be worse than if Frieren had just stolen something, because now Frieren will not get her magic research time. I just found the way that Frieren squirmed here to be really funny, and I guess it shows that, she can be kind of dense sometimes, right? But she was cluing in to what they were putting down here. Frieren, come on. Just think about what Himmel the hero would have done. So this might actually be the most expressive that I've ever seen Frieren, and I'll remind you that she made this sound in this episode.
全部は持っていけませんよ。
So Fern's just here noting that the next time something like this happens, she can just mention Frieren's name and make use of the fame of the heroes party to be able to, break through.
こういうのあまり好きじゃないんだよ。
俺は見れてよかったって思っているぜ。
Stark said that he appreciates kind of being able to experience this kind of thing once, but if he continues to travel with Frieren and they do make use of kind of the name and fame of the heroes party, it might happen more whether he wants it to or not. So the series has done this a lot so far, and I expect it to keep doing it, of course, but we basically get to see the past meet the present, with Frieren acting as the bridge. That's all from me for episode 6. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support me more directly, please consider doing it on my Ko-Fi. Again, I'd really also appreciate it if you left a like and a comment below to maybe help the algorithm work its magic. Of course, sharing the video with someone that you think might enjoy it would also be huge. A friendly reminder to take care of yourself and be kind to yourself. I'll keep doing my best too. I'm really looking forward to see what happens next, and I hope you'll be there to experience it with me.